I heard it explained very, very well by Lane Norton. Dr. Lane Norton is someone I look up to. He gives very, very good information about nutrition. And he explained it in a way of you have to restrict something, right? To achieve calories in, calories out, obviously we hope to be active. Like I said, I encourage resistance training for optimal outcomes. But then for the calories in, you have to restrict something. And the different types of things that you can restrict work better for different people. They do, and that's great. I think you should pick the tool that really works for you that you can stick to. Consistency really is the most important thing. Now, some examples of that restriction is, first of all, calories. This is something that I prefer to do. Many people just restrict the calories. They count the calories they eat each day, and then obviously, hopefully they're eating reasonably healthy foods, but then they can still include some, less healthy foods like candy. I love Mike and Ike's, and sometimes I'll try and fit Mike and Ike's into my diet because they're my favorite candy. As long as you are counting calories and restricting them below your maintenance calories, your calories out, then you will lose weight. Now, another one that is popular is the time, and this is intermittent fasting. Basically, intermittent fasting is there is a certain window of the day where you are allowed to eat. Usually it's 6 hours or 8 hours. Sometimes it can be even more strict, like 4 hours per day. So for example, let's say 6. You're only allowed to eat food each day from the time of 12 o'clock noon to 6 p.m. And outside of that time frame, you're not allowed to eat at all. And some people do really well with this because it's a very hard and fast rule that outside of this window, you're not allowed to eat. And so they eat during this window, and then outside of that window, it's easier to say, I'm not going to eat any food at all, than sometimes it is to say, I'm going to control my portions and my calories. And then just because they've restricted the amount of time each day they're allowed to eat, they end up eating less food, less calories, right? Next, a common one to do is portion size. And this is one that I actually recommend to most people. I think it's probably the best tool because it allows you to eat your exact same diet, but your portion size. Say for breakfast, you eat bacon and eggs and toast, and then for lunch, you have a sandwich. For dinner, you have spaghetti and meatballs, and then before bed, you have ice cream. And let's say that all of that comes out to 3,000 calories each day. If you were to simply take that meal schedule that I've just described and then cut your portions down so that you're eating 2/3 the amount of food, of course, you might have to get used to it. You might feel a little hungry, but you're eating all the exact same foods that you enjoy eating. And now because you're only eating 2/3 the amount of food, you're eating 2,000 calories a day rather than 3,000, which can be very, very valuable to some people. Another type of restriction is carbs, just like I was talking about with the ketogenic diet. Now, if you pursue the ketogenic diet and you are replacing the carbs that you used to eat with certain ketogenic foods, which are often very high in fat, it is probably not going to be so beneficial. Now, there are some people who will talk about the ketogenic diet and they will talk about, when you enter ketosis, your body just becomes so much more efficient at burning fat. And while that is true in certain instances, it doesn't mean that you burn extra calories just from being in ketosis. In fact, I came across an Instagram profile a while ago now, but it was this guy who shares ketogenic recipes with you. Recipes that are yummy, that you could eat, that are still considered keto, so they're good treats and good snacks for you, which is a great idea, a valuable thing for many people on the ketogenic diet. But I want to say that the one video that came across my feed that I saw was like a cream cheese and pickle wrapped in like melted cheese that you had made crispy, which I just feel like if you were outside of this realm and you didn't understand a ketogenic diet, that doesn't seem like a diet food at all, right? You're wrapping cheese around cream cheese and a pickle. It just seems kind of silly. If you're replacing all of your carbs with things like that, Or some people, when they go on the ketogenic diet, they start putting butter in their coffee and they start eating a ton of bacon, things that they didn't even used to eat, and they're replacing their carbs with these fats. Of course, fats have more than double the calories of carbs. Sometimes it is not even going to result in weight loss at all for those reasons. However, my dad, for a little while, consumed the ketogenic diet in the sake of his health, and he did it in the way that I would recommend everyone do it who's trying to do the ketogenic diet for weight loss. And pretty much what that was is he took his same diet and just removed all of the carb sources. So for example, I don't know exactly what he did eat, but again, for example, say you eat bacon and eggs and toast for breakfast in the morning, say you eat a sandwich for lunch, say you eat spaghetti and meatballs for dinner, then by just removing all of the carb sources out of that, you would just have the bacon and eggs for breakfast and no toast. And you would have your sandwich for lunch, perhaps wrapped in lettuce rather than on bread. And then at dinner time, rather than having spaghetti noodles, you could have like a spaghetti squash. And maybe if you're used to having, ice cream or something at dinner time, maybe you switch to, a lower carb version, something like a sorbet. And so you have the same diet, but you've just removed all the carb sources. And removing those carb sources removes calories. You've lowered your calories in. Now, the last type of restriction that I'll go into is just a type of food. This is something that I'll see very common. Some people want to get in better shape, and so they say, I ate no sugar for 60 days. I ate no dessert foods or no processed foods for 60 days. And I think that's an admirable thing to do. You can get a lot of benefit out of eating whole, nutritious foods. I will very seldom say that a food is unhealthy, because when you say something is unhealthy, to me it sounds like it's actively harming you. And in most cases, that is not ever the case. Most foods are not going to actively harm you, but rather some foods that are considered unhealthy by some people are just devoid of the micronutrients and the phytochemicals and the antioxidants and the fiber and protein that other healthier foods do have. Now, anyways, sometimes, if you had a diet where you were consuming those frequently, daily, weekly, and then all of a sudden you cut them out and your diet is the same, what have you done? You've restricted your calories in. So again, it's not about, these things are causing you to be fat. It's just that you've restricted your calories in versus your calories out. Now, to kind of nail this point home, I found a study that I really liked out of the New England Journal of Medicine. The title of this study is Comparison of Weight Loss Diets with Different Compositions of Fat, Protein, and Carbohydrates. So basically they just designed different types of studies they designed different types of diets that had different macronutrient profiles. One would be more ketogenic, one would be more carb heavy. They had different levels of protein, and they wanted to see if weight loss matters based on your macronutrient ratios, or if it just mattered based on calories. Now, in this study, they followed 800 participants, which is pretty good for a trial like this, for 2 years. Now, I wanted to read some quotes from this study because it's really, really good. Real quickly as well, this is a study from 2009, and it was conducted in conjunction with Harvard Medical School and Louisiana State University. Now, one of the things I liked in their introduction, they said they were talking about how studies similar to this had been done in the past, but they say small samples, underrepresentation of men, limited generalizability, a lack of blind ascertainment of the outcome, a lack of data on adherence to assigned diets, a large loss to follow-up limit the interpretation of many weight loss trials. The crucial question is whether overweight people have a better response in the long term to diets that emphasize a specific macronutrient. Thus, we recognize the need for a large trial that would be designed to overcome the limitations of previous trials. Now, again, they followed 800 participants for 2 years, and they assigned them to 4 different diet groups. The nutrient goals for the 4 diet groups were 20% fat, 15% protein, and 65% carbohydrates. So this is a low-fat, average protein diet. The second group was 20% fat, 25% protein, and 55% carbohydrates. This was considered a low-fat, high-protein diet. The third group was 40% fat, 15% protein, and 45% carbohydrates. This was considered high-fat, average protein. And then 40% fat, 25% protein, and 35% carbohydrates. This was considered high fat and high protein. Now, as they followed these participants for the duration of 2 years, they found that most of the weight loss occurred in the first 6 months, and then many people regained some of the weight from 6 months to 2 years. They did employ various strategies to help with diet adherence. They had, support groups and like classes that you could attend weekly to kind of teach you about tools and tactics for maintaining your diet, motivate you to stick to your diet, and so on. And one thing that I actually think was really, really cool about this study design is they used biometric tools to understand whether or not somebody adhered to their diet properly. Now, again, this was a 2-year study. So over a 2-year study, it's not like you can keep somebody in your lab and monitor exactly what they eat all the time for 2 years. That'd be completely unrealistic and very expensive. But what they tried to do, again, with these classes, is just teach the people about what their diet was supposed to look like, encourage them to keep it, and teach them tools of how to. But then what they did is they measured the amount of nitrogen in somebody's urine, and they measured the respiratory quotient to determine whether or not they adhered to their diet properly. So again, if somebody was in a higher carbohydrate, a higher fat versus a lower fat group, going back to that respiratory quotient, depending on what that quotient was, they could tell if the majority of somebody's energy expenditure was coming from calories provided by fat or coming from carbohydrates. And then the amount of nitrogen in somebody's urine could measure the amount of protein they were consuming. So if someone was in a high or a low protein group, we would expect to see more nitrogen in the urine for somebody who is eating more protein. And, well, basically, they were able to confirm using these biometric numbers that the people on average were very compliant with the diet group that they were assigned to. Now, when we look at the amount of weight loss compared between those who had high fat, low fat, high carbohydrate, low carbohydrate, we see that the differences were mostly similar. In fact, I want to say when it comes to the fats and the carbohydrates, most all of the groups were within the averages of the weight loss between the high and low were within the margin of error for the statistics, meaning that you can't really find a significant difference. Now, if you remember from episode 1, we talked about the p-value, and the p-value talks about the strength of a difference. Basically, it tells you if this difference occurred by random chance, what is the probability that we would be able to replicate the results that we got in this study. So you want a low p-value to describe strong statistical outcomes. The gold standard for p-value is 0.05. Anything higher than that number means that there was not a significant difference between these groups. Now, what we see is, for example, the difference in weight loss between the high-fat and the low-fat group had a p-value of 0.94. So that is a very, very bad p-value. The difference in weight loss between those with high carbohydrate and low carbohydrate was 0.42. So that's, of course, better than 0.9, but it is still far above our gold standard of 0.05, meaning that there was not a significant difference between the groups. Now, in fact, there was never a significant difference between any of the groups, but what you will find is that the lowest p-values occur in the differences in protein, which doesn't surprise me at all. Doesn't surprise me at all because, again, protein helps with your satiety. It helps you feel more full. Protein is going to increase your lean muscle mass, which likely will help you be more active and burn more calories like we talked about, and therefore lose more weight. Now, in the discussion, if you're not familiar, at every scientific article that is published, usually they'll take the results and the author will offer a discussion, some insights and some thoughts about what conclusions can be drawn from the results that were got, some of the reasons for what we saw in the article. In the discussion of this article, I wanted to read two different lines for you. The first one says, "The principal finding of this study is that the diets were equally successful in promoting clinical meaningful weight loss and the maintenance of weight loss over the course of 2 years." So that might be something that I failed to mention. I did mention that the weight loss was similar. However, the rebound after the initial weight loss, so for that 6-month portion to 2-year portion, where many people regained some of the weight, that was also statistically the same between all the different groups. So there was no difference in the amount of weight lost and no difference in the amount of weight regained. Now, the next line says, "These divergent results suggest that any type of diet, when taught for the purpose of weight loss with enthusiasm and persistence, can be effective. When non-nutritional influences are minimized, as they were in our study, the specific macronutrient content is of minor importance." And that is what I want you guys to understand, is that there are multiple ways to skin a cat, basically. Now, some people might hear this and think, oh, well, darn it, there's no best way to do it. That's sad, because some people want that magic pill. But really, the results of this study are exciting because they tell you that no matter what tool you find to be the most effective and enjoyable for you, it can be effective at promoting weight loss, which is good. This is very, very, very good. It's also worth mentioning, I wanted to point out that in the course of this study, with the various different macronutrient contents, because of the weight loss, the changes in blood cholesterol levels in these overweight participants and the changes in things like blood pressure, again, these markers of metabolic syndrome, the effect on these markers was the same across all diets, which again would suggest that fat loss is very important because independent of what you're eating, you can see improvements in these health markers just by promoting a healthier weight.